Starting on time, it's 10 o'clock exactly. If I have to introduce our first speaker for the day, it's going to take me the next maybe 45 minutes and you won't get a chance to speak. So I'm going to take the shortcut route and just read out some of the honors Mr. Nandan Nilekani has received. Okay. He's got an honorary Doctor of Law from Rotman School of Management 2011. These are, by the way, only some of the honors, okay, not all. Okay, he Transformational Idea of the Year Award in 2011. 2006, he became the youngest entrepreneur to join 20 global leaders in the World Economic Forum. Time magazine placed Mr. Nilekani as the Times 100 list of world's most influential people, and the honors go on. It's also important to note that he won the Padma Bhushan in 2006. So let me welcome our very first Padma Bhushan speaker at the CCR, Nandan.
Thanks, MD. Well, it's great to be here. This is a long pending commitment I made to MD that I'll come and speak to all of you, but the dates could never match. So I'm also delighted that I'm with other distinguished speakers like Aditya Jha, Jagdish Kini, and others. So that's great. So today I thought I'll speak about something which is going on in India, which I think is transformational, and give you the story of how it came about and what are its implications for the future. For the last 6-7 years, let me just, I'm a big believer that if India is going to change, one of the changes will come through technological transformation, because I think the rate of disruption which is happening in technology is so intense that it has the potential to dramatically change the rules of the game. And sometimes in a society which is so stuck in various things, using this kind of disruption is a good way to sort of move the needle on everything. So that's how about 7 years back I took up this assignment to give everybody a digital identity called Aadhaar. So to cut a long story short, the Aadhaar program is now very successful. There are 1 billion people in India who have an Aadhaar number. And just to give you a sense of the uniqueness of the achievement, if you look at around the world today and look at what are the digital platforms that have 1 billion users, there are maybe about a dozen digital platforms that have 1 billion users. The original two would be Microsoft Windows and Office, which took about 25 years to reach 1 billion users. Google has a lot of platforms that have 1 billion users, like Gmail and YouTube and Android and so on. And Facebook has Facebook and WhatsApp, and that's about it. They're the only real billion user platforms in the world. The Chinese platforms are not yet at 1 billion. You have people like WeChat and all that, maybe 800 million. The Chinese platforms don't travel well outside China. They tend to be China-centric, whereas US platforms have a global reach. So Aadhaar is the only non-US billion user platform. That's important to know that. And it's the only one which is not done by a company. All the others are owned by Silicon Valley or Seattle companies. And it's the only one which is actually done by the government. And it's also the only one, it's also the fastest one. It reached 1 billion users in 5.5 years. So that's the thing. But that is one part. And a big part of the Aadhaar from a government perspective, which is what you hear about, is its role in making government public service delivery more efficient and more effective. Because I think we often don't realize how dysfunctional the public delivery system is, because many of us don't deal with it. All of us who have successful in our careers and earn well don't really deal with the government for public, except to get a driver's license or commute on the road. But otherwise, we don't really go to buy rice from the PTA shop or get an old age pension or whatever it is that is there. But millions of people depend on these government benefits, and getting those benefits or dealing with the state, the transactions involved are extremely painful, because you have to deal with corruption, you have to deal with bad behavior, there's no customer service and all that. And a big part of the reason for that is that unlike in markets where customers have choice, in public delivery, customers have no choice. Like think about it, none of you are around, but let's say if I go back and look at pre-91 India, I could only buy a scooter from Bajaj, I could only fly Indian Airlines, I could only, the two-year waiting list to get a scooter and all that stuff. I could only get a phone from BSNL. And then markets, what markets did was markets created competition. So now I can fly Indigo or the late lamented Kingfisher or whatever. Or I can get a phone from any mobile company. So basically what markets did for those who had purchasing power is it enabled them to have choice. And when you have choice in the purchase of a good or service, then the bargaining power shifts from the supplier to the customer. When the supplier is a dominant monopolistic supplier and you have no choice, then he can dictate terms to you. But if you have a choice, then the consumer dictates, or consumer is king. In government service, there is absolutely no choice. For example, if you think about PDS, PDS is a huge thing. PDS touches maybe 200, 300 million families in India. There are 500,000 PDS outlets. It's really the bulwark of our social security system to give cheaper rice or wheat or sugar or kerosene to poor people. The way it's designed is that a person is assigned to one shop. So every PDS shop is assigned, say, 400 families. And you can only go to that shop to buy things. So if that shop is closed or the shop is mixing stones in the rice, you can't do much about it except lump it. So I think similarly when you get your pension, you have to go to some bureaucrat in the panchayat office to get a pension, and he can decide to give it to you, not give it to you, take a bribe to give it to you. So the whole interface of the individual who is getting a benefit with the state is actually very, very messy, and that's part of the problems we have. So what we actually said, is there a way to use technology to change that interface? So the whole idea of this billion users is not just the fact that they have a digital identity, which is itself very important for people who don't have identity, but it's also a way for verifying their identity online, digitally, using a biometric. So the Aadhaar platform provides for what we call as authentication, where I can give my finger or my iris of my eye, and a device, I can look at it or touch it, and that information is sent to the Aadhaar server, and it comes back and says, yes, the person standing in front of you is this person. So I say I'm Aadhaar number 123, my name is X, this is my fingerprint, and the system confirms that. Now what that does is it essentially makes your identity mobile. Your identity is now on the cloud. And once your identity is on the cloud, wherever you are, you can do a verification. So the one advantage, the many advantage of that. One advantage of that is that you can identify yourself without being physically present somewhere. So, one of the government applications built is called Jeevan Praman, because when government servants retire, they get a pension, they get a lifelong pension. But to keep getting the pension, they have to prove they are alive. So it's called a life certificate, that's right. This life certificate is a very complicated thing. You have to go to some government office, sit down, maybe you have to pay a bribe, all that stuff. So we said, let's say there's a different way to do it. So currently the Jeevan Praman says that if you do an Aadhaar authentication biometrically, and that biometric authentication is electronically sent to us, then that is proof of being alive. So what does that do? That means now I don't have to go to the pension office or the government office. I can go to anyone who has a biometric Aadhaar device, do an authentication, and that proof will go. So it's an asynchronous proof of being alive. And if I'm invalid or I'm busy, somebody can come to my house with a phone with a biometric device and do an authentication. So suddenly, instead of my having to go to some office, somebody can come to me wherever I am. Or I can, in the future, I can do it on my own on my phone. So we call this ability to verify with Aadhaar, we call that being presence-less. I don't have to be physically present to do that. But the other benefit of authentication is that the mobility it gives me on the cloud. Because once I have my ID on the cloud, then wherever I am, I can authenticate myself. And how that is applicable in the service aspect of public delivery is now, instead of limiting my exercise of getting my rations or entitlements at one PDS outlet, I can do it in any PDS outlet. Because wherever I go, I can authenticate myself. And once I'm authenticated that I'm that same person, then the system can give me my benefits. So this unlocks the portability of benefits. And a good example is in Andhra Pradesh today, where there are 29,000 PDS shops. And Andhra Pradesh resident who's eligible for PDS can go to any one of these 29,000 shops to get his entitlements, because every one of them has an Aadhaar authentication point. Now what that does, it dramatically changes the bargaining power. Because if a particular PDS outlet behaves badly, he's closed, or he mixes stones in the rice, then customers will stop going to him, and then they'll go somewhere else. So either you perform or you perish. And I think this fundamental shift is a huge thing, which dramatically improves the quality of public service, thanks to the portability of benefits which you get because you have a digital identity which is verifiable on the cloud. So I'm just trying to connect how this thing can help that thing. The same thing is happening for money. As I said, it will, today more and more money which is sent by the government is electronically transferred into people's bank accounts using Aadhaar. And for that we built a very large cash transfer system, the world's largest cash transfer system, where everyone with an Aadhaar number and has a bank account, and the Aadhaar number and the bank account are linked. So this link is maintained in a table. This table is called as the Aadhaar Payment Bridge. It's maintained by a central entity called the National Payment Corporation of India, which is the Indian sort of Visa or MasterCard. And that has, so everyone who has a bank account linked has an entry in that table that says Aadhaar number 123 SBI, Aadhaar number 456 HDFC or whatever. And today this table has 260 million entries. 260 million a bank account, and that entry is in this table. Now why is this important? Because this now enables a very seamless electronic way of transferring a financial benefit into the account of a person. So in the old model, if there was a list of pensioners, either the cash was given to them, so you have to meet somebody and give you cash, or you have to give your bank account and all complicated stuff. Today, in any case, the Aadhaar number is there in the list of pensioners, because you need that to eliminate, the Aadhaar number being a unique number, you use that to eliminate ghosts and duplicates. So only real people are there, and there's only one pension that a person gets because the number is unique and you can't have the number twice. So using the same number, I can now use that number as a financial address. So when I'm sending the pension, I can say, first I establish the person is eligible for a pension, he gets 1,000 rupees, and then I can say, send 1,000 rupees to Aadhaar number 123. So just a financial address. And that instruction is sent to this NPCI. And NPCI says, looks up the table and says, oh, Aadhaar number 123 is in SBI. So sends a 1,000 rupee payment instruction to SBI. And SBI says, oh, Aadhaar number 123's customer account number is 789, and I credit that customer. All this happens electronically in real time. So once more and more benefits are, cash benefits are financially flowing, they can flow using the Aadhaar number unerringly into the bank account of the person. And then that person in turn can withdraw the money from anywhere. He can go to a bank branch, he can go to an ATM, he can go to a cash out at a point of sale, he can go to a BC. And so suddenly the whole thing has become, he doesn't have to meet anyone. So the money comes into his account, he gets a message in his phone that his money has come, he goes to the nearest cash outlet and takes his money out. So suddenly we have removed the whole interface issues, and you have created choice. I can withdraw the money whenever I want, or I can even be cashless. I can go to a retailer, and instead of taking the money out of my account, I can just say debit my account and credit the merchant's account to the extent of how much I've bought. So I can make the whole thing cashless. This system is actually used for increasingly for more and more benefits. For example, the entire subsidy in LPG is now done using this system. And that's 150 million people have, 140 million people have this subsidy of the LPG which comes into the bank account. And that alone, system does about 3 million transactions a day. So we have now 1 billion transactions a year of electronically money being credited into people's account for LPG. The same thing is now being done for Narega payments and so on and so forth. So today, so far, since last 3-4 years, about 30,000 crores has been transferred using this platform. into people's accounts. And that dramatically changes the whole thing, because now I don't, once I'm eligible for something and the rule is set up, then the money will come automatically into my account. I don't have to meet anyone. I'll get a message, and at my time and convenience, I can go to any location and withdraw my money. That's the power of what you can do with all this stuff. So anyway, so Aadhaar authentication was an important thing because it allowed you to do all this presence-less behavior, gave you portability on the cloud, and so on. So on top of that, we did one more layer, which was that one of the things we realized as we were building this authentication layer was that more and more locations, or to get a new bank account, or to get a new insurance policy, or to get a new mutual fund, or to get a new SIM card, you have to give a government-issued photo ID. You know, how do you get a SIM card? You go to some guy and he makes you Xerox your PAN card and this and that, and you give you a SIM card. So this thing is called as KYC, or Know Your Customer. And so a government-issued photo ID was becoming more and more important. And then we said, why can't we deliver the government-issued photo ID from the Aadhaar system? Because the Aadhaar system already has your name and address and your photograph. So is there a way, with the consent of the user, if the user can say, now I release my KYC details to this counterparty. So the counterparty could be a SIM card vendor, or telco, or it could be a bank, or it could be anybody else. And this is what we call as the electronic KYC. But to do this, to release my information, I have to authorize it. And therefore, you use authentication to release the KYC. In other words, this KYC details of your name and address are only released with your consent. So you actually say, I now hereby authorize the UID system to release my name and address to the bank. And this is an accepted KYC now by all the regulators in India. So RBI accepts it for bank accounts, IRDA accepts it for insurance policies, PFRDA accepts it for pensions, SEBI accepts it for mutual funds, and TRA and DOT accept it for SIM cards. So for the first time in India, we have a common KYC across all major products that are regulated and all electronic. And the beauty of this is that it dramatically changes the productivity of opening a bank account. So as an example, so earlier if you go to open a bank account in a village, it takes weeks to open a bank account. But now you can open a bank account in 1 minute, because you can just go to a bank or to a BC, just put your finger, authenticate, authorize KYC, open a bank account. So eKYC is not only a transformational productivity tool, it's also a huge convenience, customer convenience, because now I can get a bank account or a mutual fund in 1 minute. And the best part of this is that if you can now make the KYC operate self-service, which means can I do it on my own phone with an authentication, then I don't even have to go anywhere. And one of the big things that has happened is that SEBI, which is the regulator for mutual funds, has said that for below 50,000 rupee mutual fund investment, I can do an electronic KYC on a phone using an OTP. And the OTP is provided because in the Aadhaar system you have a mobile number which is registered as the Aadhaar number's registered mobile, and you can send the OTP to that phone. So now somebody can buy a mutual fund below 50,000 rupees, just like he buys something at Flipkart or Amazon. You can buy a mutual fund. So this dramatically changes the cost of acquisition of a customer. I mean, if you know what's, I don't know, is anybody here from the mutual fund industry? I don't know. No, oh you are. Yeah, so in the mutual fund business, what has happened is, if you look at the history of mutual funds and the capital markets in India, there's been actually, there have been pioneers in automation at the back end. You know, way back in the 90s, we came up with this extraordinary system of setting up the National Stock Exchange, the National Stock Depository Limited, and all kinds of, SEBI and all that. So the entire back end of the mutual fund business or capital markets is all paperless. There's custodial services, depositories, and so on. But the front end was very cumbersome because there are so many scams in that business that they made it more and more difficult to buy these mutual funds. So you have to buy a mutual fund, you have to prove who you are, you have to sign something, you have to show your mug to somebody, etc. So the estimate in the industry is that the mutual fund acquisition of a customer costs about 1,000 rupees. To get one customer, on the paperwork, sending him to go, seeing his face, all that costs money, in-person verification. Once you start doing an electronic acquisition of a customer using all these tools, the cost of acquisition of a customer drops to 10 rupees. So think about it. The cost of customer acquisition is dropping by a factor of 100. So what that does is that if the cost of a customer acquisition drops, then the amount of money you need to make from the customer to recover your cost of acquisition also comes down. So earlier, when the cost of acquisition was 1,000 rupees, the investment from the customer had to be at least 2 lakhs in a mutual fund to justify the return. But when the cost drops to 10 rupees, the investment of only 2,000 rupees from the customer is sufficient to get a return. And therefore, when you reduce the ticket size of investment from 2 lakhs to 2,000, suddenly the number of households who can invest in capital markets goes up from 10 million households to 100 million households. And that's how markets expand. So we must realize that a key element of market expansion is actually reducing customer acquisition cost. And here we're talking about customer acquisition costs not in 1%, 2%, but 100%, 1000% kind of thing. So eKYC does that, and which is why it's being adopted widely by SEBI. In fact, we have a conference on May 30th in Bombay with all the mutual fund operators, trying to get them to use this new technique of selling mutual funds. Banks are using KYC for bank account opening. Anyone here from the banks?
We've started using it in this.
Oh, where are you from? Religare, yeah. So of course, Religare, Bajaj Finance, all the NBFCs are using eKYC. So eKYC and Aadhaar are two important pillars of this business. But there's more to come, because on top of that we built some other things. For example, now using the same Aadhaar and eKYC, I can digitally sign a document. Now this is very important because, for example, I'm doing a loan. Now a loan is not just a KYC, you also have to give some information and then you have to sign the document. Now again, if you have to do in-person signature, it gets very complicated. But now using Aadhaar, I can sign it. And this is called an e-sign, or digitally signing a document with Aadhaar on your electronic device. And then there's a whole system that is being set up, which is how do you store all these documents? Because as billions of documents get signed, how do you store them securely? How do you retrieve them? How do you, make them interoperable? So there's a whole system which is coming up called the digital locker system, which allows you to keep these documents in different lockers. It's like Dropbox or Google Docs, Google Drive, but they're far more sophisticated in terms of encryption and retrieval and so on and so forth. So the combination of eKYC, which allows you to open a financial product or a SIM card paperless, the digital signature, which removes the requirement for in-person signatures, wet signatures, and the locker, which allows you to store this, essentially creates the complete infrastructure for making everything paperless. This is a huge productivity benefit and market benefit from going paperless. So Aadhaar, essentially, authentication allows you to go presence-less in some sense, and all these three things, eKYC and the e-sign and the storage, digital locker, allows you to go paperless. And the third piece of this puzzle architecture is something which was launched by RBI about a month back, by NPCI under RBI's guidance, called Unified Payment Interface, or UPI. And UPI is the first attempt in the world to create a completely interoperable mobile payment interface, which allows you to transfer money from any mobile to any mobile, and instant credit, instant debit. So 7/24 instant real-time financial transactions, debit and credit, which are now coming, which allows you to send money to somebody, or somebody can request money from you and you can approve it. This is called as push and pull transactions. And this is very important because this is extremely important for merchant transactions. So when you go to a merchant, you buy something from a merchant, then the merchant needs to get money from you. So the merchant, now with this architecture, the merchant can pull the money from you. So I go to a shop and buy something worth 5,000 rupees, and the shop says, okay, where do I pull this money from? And you give your address of your account, and they do something, and you get a request on your phone saying, there's a request from your phone from XYZ store for a debit of 5,000 rupees. You say yes, and the money gets debited in real time. So this whole thing is a big part of making things cashless. And yeah, it's basically going to make cards obsolete, because now everybody's pocket has a phone, so why do you need a card, right? And also it will dramatically expand the market. Today, credit card market is very small, because only high-end merchants have cards, and card fees are high, and so on and so forth. All that will become, so it will expand. So UPI is what we call as the cashless piece, and almost every bank is coming on live onto that platform. All the major merchants, both the physical merchants like the retail organized retail outlets, as well as online merchants like Flipkart, Amazon, IRCTC are all, we're talking to all of them. So ultimately, all that will make things cashless. And then the final piece of this puzzle is, how do we allow, this is getting boring or what? Okay. So the final piece of this puzzle is, how do we get people to leverage their own data? Now, this is very important. Think about it. India is going from data poor to data rich in a very short time. The reason is that when you have a smartphone, you're generating a digital footprint. When you make digital payments, you're generating a digital footprint. When you pay taxes, you're generating a digital footprint, and so on and so forth. When you're on social media, you're generating a digital footprint. So suddenly, Indians are going from being data poor to data rich. Now the rate of this is far higher than the rate of anything else. Right? Your GDP growth, nominal terms, growing at 15%. Salary is growing at 10%. But data is growing at 1,000%. Right? Because so suddenly everybody is going from being data poor to data rich. And data is the basis of decision making. Right? Now, the way it's worked in the West is this data is used for decision making by governments and by companies. So Dun & Bradstreet will use data to decide your credit rating. Google will use your data to peddle you something. Facebook will use your data to whatever, what they do. So what we have done is, while we have created this data explosion, the benefit of that data explosion is not coming to the individual. It's going to large companies or to governments. Governments use it either for good purposes, to give right information, or to do surveillance on you, right? So fundamentally, while there is this massive data explosion, the benefit is accruing to governments and large companies. It's not accruing to the individual. We think that if we can flip this around, and if the individual can be put at the center of his own data, then suddenly the individual can use his own data, his own digital footprint for his own advancement. For example, he can use his data to get a loan. Because if I go to a lender, I go to Religare, and Religare wants to give me a loan. They want to know my behavior, they want to know my transactions. If I'm a small business, they want to see my sales, how much returns, do I get money on time. So all this data is there. So I can use it for borrowing, or I can use it to get a job. I can go somewhere and share my data and get a better job, or I can use it for all kinds of things. So is there a way to make data in the hands of the user? So what we're thinking is, how do we use all this infrastructure? Because to do that, you need digital infrastructure. So now we can design a system where different data sources can have a way for a customer to request his data to give it to somebody else. So I can have an API which allows me to go to my phone company and get my prepaid mobile payment details. I can go to my bank and get my statement. I can go to the income tax and get my TDS returns. I can go to GST and get my tax filings. And then I can get all that and give it to my lender. The lender says, okay, I've got all these things. Now I think this guy is eligible for a loan. And so dramatically you can change the lending business. And this is first time anywhere where we are actually putting the power of data into the hands of consumers. The consumer is in charge of his own data. And the only way you can do that is because of all this other infrastructure. Because unless I can, in a real-time way, verify that he is the genuine person, I can't even release the data. That's why, so having the Aadhaar and the eKYC and all these other things are actually prerequisites to create a digitally, a digital way to get my own data. Now, this is something which people in other countries are only thinking about. In the US, there is a provision to say information portability must be given to consumers in the banking sector. Or in the healthcare system, there's something called the blue button, which requires that if I press a blue button, then my health record must be released to me by the hospital. In Europe, now they're coming out with a directive that banks must release the data of a consumer on demand. So all that is happening. The understanding is coming everywhere that customers must be put in charge of their own data. But you don't have the infrastructure to do it. How do you do this stuff? And I think in India we have a chance to do it because we have underlying methods of having an identity for everyone and a way for that identity to be verified online in real time and take it forward. So why I'm talking about all this is that when you look at this whole stack, 1 billion people have identity with Aadhaar. 200 million people have smartphones, growing to 500 million smartphones in the next 3 to 4 years. Everybody will have a bank account because either the government is pushing the bank account or because the market forces will create bank accounts. And if I have the bank account, which is a place for me to receive and send money, if I have an identity which can be verified, and I have a smartphone on which I can communicate and do things, suddenly the world opens up. I can use this for making transactions paperless, presenceless, cashless, and I can leverage my own data. So why this is important is because this whole thing is the basis for transforming business and government. Both will get transformed because you can now deliver things to a person on their phone, all these things, and it's going to have a dramatic impact on every industry. It's certainly going to have a dramatic impact on financial services, whether it's banking, insurance, pensions, capital markets. It's going to have an impact on the telecom industry. It's going to have an impact on retail. It's going to have an impact on, every industry is going to change. And it's also a great opportunity because now you have the chance using these technological layers to redesign or re-engineer or transform the customer experience. Because you can deliver every possible service to them on their phone with one click. And that's the power of what's coming. And I'd urge you to look at that. And the reason why it's going to become prevalent on the phone is because the authentication of Aadhaar, this using the biometric and the iris or the fingerprint, which was done so far where you went somewhere and did it, is now possible, will be possible on your own device. As you know, a biometric reader is becoming de facto on smartphones. I mean, Apple has the Apple Touch, which leads to Apple Pay, but that's a closed system. It's only in the Apple world. But most smartphones will have a device, either a fingerprint reader or an iris reader, which can do an Aadhaar authentication in the next year or two. In fact, Samsung is launching a tablet next month, which will allow iris authentication using Aadhaar. So once you have phones which have biometric authentication with Aadhaar built in, then suddenly you can do two-factor authentication with one click. Because on your phone, the fact that you possess the phone and the OTP and all that proves that the phone is yours. And that is called one-factor authentication. And that replaces the card. So the cardless happens because of the phone replacing the card. And the Aadhaar authentication confirms who you are. And then you no longer need a PIN and remembering a password and all that. So with one click, you can prove that the phone is yours and the Aadhaar number is yours. So you can create a one-click, two-factor authentication experience using public infrastructure. It's not like you have to go to Apple and so on. So this open public infrastructure will allow you to dramatically build applications that are oriented completely towards self-service or even assisted service, but with a completely different consumer experience. And because the cost is very low, because there's no distribution cost. The distribution is on the phone of the customer, so there's no distribution cost there. And because everything is paperless and cashless, the cost of transactions fall by a factor of 10 or factor of 100, and therefore dramatically costs come down, which means markets expand. So not only it's going to deliver a whole new customer experience, which is far more convenient, it's also going to dramatically expand the market. So everybody's business will also get affected. So I think while one aspect of what we did was really to make the government efficient in terms of being able to send money and eliminate fraud, the other benefit now is that allows businesses and innovators to use the same technology to change the customer experience and dramatically expand markets. So that's what is coming, and I hope you guys will use all this. Thank you. I'll take questions. Yeah.
There's Aadhaar and then there's e-Aadhaar. And I believe right now, as we speak in the telecom industry, they're speaking about Aadhaar being acceptable as proof of identity, but e-Aadhaar being not.
You're from telecom? We'll come to idea. Yeah.
So what's the difference?
No, actually it's like this. See, what happened was the real value of Aadhaar is the ID on the cloud. There's a physical Aadhaar which you get through the post office. But the post office couldn't deliver 1 billion letters. I mean, they're not designed for that level of this thing. So there was a lot of people not getting the letters. So we built e-Aadhaar as a way for a person to ask for a printout of his Aadhaar from the system. So that is the thing. But the real value will be online authentication. So what's going to happen in the future is that at a retail outlet where you're selling a SIM card, he'll have a phone with a biometric device. So he'll just do an authentication KYC. The KYC will prove who it is. That KYC is acceptable to DOT as a proof of SIM card. And the SIM card can be immediately provisioned. Today you're not provisioning the SIM card immediately. So we can go to instant provisioning of SIM cards. And that becomes a paperless transaction. So today, for example, government does all this term sell, checks whether you're sold to the right guy, puts fines on you. All that can go away. So, but it's happening. I mean, the TRA and DOT is talking about doing that. But already banks are doing it. Telcos are not yet doing it. But in the next couple of years, that should happen. Yeah, just tell me your name and where you're from so that I can contextualize it.
Sure, thank you. It was a very, very enriching 45 minutes. Thank you for that. My name is Anusuya Ghosh. I'm from Edelweiss, Tokyo Life Insurance. So, you know, whatever that you were saying is mostly on the financial transaction side.
No, finance is a big deal, but it could be non-financial.
Yes, I know, but their health records, because most of these are disparate institutions.
Yeah.
Some have digital infrastructure, some don't. So, is there anything that we're doing?
Yeah, see, this is, actually you asked me two separate questions. See, birth and death registration is a function done by government, right? So there is a body, there's an officer in Delhi called the Registrar General of India, who has the function of registering births and deaths, who is also the same body which does the census every 10 years. The body that does census and births and deaths thing. But they don't register it themselves. They do it to the states. So birth registration is done through the states. So because it is a federal system and there is no common platform which they should have done, the level of birth registration in India is very erratic. So, and also because of lack of poor governance in states, and also because for a long time deliveries were not happening in hospitals. In the West it happens in the hospital, registration happens immediately. So unlike in developed countries where registration of births at about 98–99%, in India it's much lower, and in some Indian states it's as low than 50%. So this is a major fix, and it requires fixing millions of touch points, right? I mean, I don't know, a few 100,000 touch points anyway. So I think it's doable, but it's a long reform because it requires a platform, it requires incentives for children to be brought into a register, it requires more hospital births, and so on. It's a big issue. Deaths is also a similar issue, but it's maybe not as bad as that, but even that system doesn't exist. So to get birth and death registration going, you need to fix the public system. The second part of your question is health records. And then, yes, you can use this infrastructure to create a completely electronic portable health record system. So basically, I link my health record to my ID. I sign it and store it in a digital locker. So when I go for a particular treatment, I can just invoke my health records and share it with that doctor or that specialist and get treatment. So that's the end game in this. The thing is that there is no one to champion this. So unlike in the financial sector where you have, the finance sector is more technologically advanced and you have RBI and all that. In the health sector, there's no one to do this. So in theory, there we absolutely no issues. We can build the most modern health record system, which is entirely electronic, entirely with customer approval, protect privacy, protect security, make it interoperable, on demand. All that is doable, but there's no one to take leadership on it.
Thank you.
Nandan?
Yeah.
Some of the
Their
bank-
name and organization.
My name is Pawan Kumar. I'm from Tata Sky.
That's kind. Yeah, you can also use that.
Yeah. See, in some bank portals, what I've seen is there is an IMPS which is already activated, which
Yeah.
can be used in lieu of NEFT.
Yeah.
Right. Now, how is IMPS different from UPI?
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, you can think of UPI as the next generation IMPS. See, IMPS stands for Immediate Payment System, and it was designed by NPCI to transfer money in real time. So it's a real-time system 24/7 where money is transferred immediately. But IMPS is fundamentally a credit system. In other words, you can send money to somebody else. And the biggest use of IMPS is actually in the remittance market, where somebody, Indians have a lot of migrants who come from rural India to urban India, and they want to send money home. So what they do is they'll go in Dharavi, they'll go to a business correspondent and give 5,000 rupees cash. And they will give the account number of their family member in some village somewhere, in Jharkhand or Orissa, wherever. And the money is sent in real time to that account. A message is sent, and that person's family members can go to a bank or ATM and withdraw the money. So that remittance is their biggest use case. And they do today about 20,000 crores a month. So month of March, they did 20,000 crore of transactions. That means they have a run rate of 240,000 crores. So this product from zero utilization has gone to about 60% market share in the remittance business. But it was not a good debit product. It couldn't debit an account. What IMPS UPI does, apart from making it much more programmable and APIs and mobile to mobile, also does debit. And debit is very important for merchant transactions, right? So in Tata Sky, if you can send, let's say that my subscription is running low, I have to pay you 500 bucks. You can send me a message on my phone saying you owe 500 rupees for renewing your Tata Sky DTH thing. So I just press yes and my debit will happen. So I couldn't do that with IMPS. So the big advantage with IMPS, apart from mobile to mobile, is that it provides real-time debit. So merchant transactions now become cashless. Make sense?
Vinod Juneja from Religare Enterprise. I just wanted to check this. Why transport authorities are not using this platform? Because you're issuing registration certificates, insurance companies are issuing insurance documents, you have to carry permission sensitive all the time. So why don't we use this platform to have all those documents available somewhere in the data cloud, and wherever you are caught, wherever somebody wants to check.
Sure, you understand that.
Just press the button
Yeah.
and then do it.
Yeah, so you have to understand India's federal structure, right? Do you know what's a concurrent list? What's a state list? What's a central list? Constitution. Okay, let's go back to Constitution. So under the Constitution, different authority are vested with different agencies. So there are authorities that are uniquely vested in the central government. That's called the central list. There are authorities that are uniquely vested in state governments. That's called the state list. And there are authorities or subjects where both have a role. And that's called the concurrent list. For example, education is on the concurrent list. The reason why you're able to do this rapidly in banking, telecom, and Aadhaar and all that, because they're all central programs. So if I want to bring a change in banking, I just go to RBI, and RBI's writ applies to the whole country. Similarly with insurance, similarly with telecom, I go to TRA, DOT. Similarly with income tax central. Transportation is a concurrent list, I think, or it's state list. So transportation, It's actually concurrent because the transportation macro rules are set by the Motor Vehicles Act, which is a central government act. But the implementation is also at each state. So every state has a RTO and all that. So whenever you have and so the same issue with health. So when you have a area which is either a state subject or a concurrent subject, you can't roll it out in one shot. You have to get each state to do it. And each state has different levels of technology and sophistication. So now the central government has given the state governments a driver license and registration system, but it's an old style offline system. So somebody has to dramatically re-engineer that. Theoretically entirely possible, but to do it requires again someone like health. We need an owner. We need him to convince 29 states to use it. It's that kind of stuff.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm Ishani from ICICI Prudential Life Insurance.
Wow.
I just want to tell you that we are actually using Aadhaar as an unique identification number when we are giving the customers the opportunity to buy policies online.
Wonderful.
So basically we're not asking for anything else. We're just telling them if you can key in your Aadhaar number and everything gets populated. Now this is typically for ICICI Bank. We've not been able to do it for the society at large, but since we are partnering with ICICI Bank for our business,
So and I say a bank customer can.
Yes. So that's how it gets pre-populated in the system. So then you don't need to come with any papers or anything like that. So it's really seamless and it's really effective. The question which I have is that what you were saying is that a lot of this mobile number thing is very critical when you're like taking the Aadhaar card, right? So what happens when any consumer changes the mobile number?
Yeah. So I think the thing is that historically in the Indian system there's a lot of churn of mobile numbers. Because 99% of mobile phones are prepaid, and people getting new phones. But my view is that churn will come down. The idea guy. I think the churn will come down because as you start, number of reasons. One is that hopefully with more efficient mobile number portability, I keep the mobile number even when I change my service provider. Second, most people, about 80% of Indian phones have dual SIM. So I'll use one SIM for incoming calls that I keep constant, and I'll use one for outgoing. So I think the churn of mobile numbers, I think will come down. Also, there's a big churn in between, and all these new guys came, and all the offer and all. So I think, and as you start giving your mobile phone as your registered mobile in different areas, then you will reduce the churn. So I think but fundamentally today Aadhaar system, I can change my mobile number online. So let's say that in my Aadhaar system there's a registered mobile number. If I change my mobile phone, I can change that number and put my new number there.
But then does that get authenticated, that new number?
Yeah, it's done when you do for example, there are some processes for making sure it's the new number. Or when you buy if you buy a SIM card with a eKYC in the future when that comes, at that time he'll ask you, do you want to replace this mobile number in your Aadhaar database? So you can do it like in real time. And similarly, banks have processes by which you can change the mobile. But I agree with you. I think mobile number churn is a factor which comes in the way of some of this.
Thank you.
I have a question related to this itself.
You're from?
I'm from ICICI Prudential. My name is Ashwini.
All of them. Big gang.
Yeah. So my question is, when the number is incorrect, I've changed the number.
Which number?
The mobile number.
Yeah.
And it's incorrect, and my OTP will go to that number. How is that will that be taken care of?
So it won't be recognized as a valid number.
So nobody can do a fraud using this kind of a.
No, that's why, see, the whole idea of two-factor authentication is to reduce the fraud, right? So if I use only OTP as an authentication method, and then the OTP is intercepted of wrong number, then yes, you can fake it. Which is why across the world, especially of financial transactions, there is this emphasis on two-factor authentication. Now, two-factor authentication, there are three kinds of authentications. What you have, what you possess. So a card is an example of what you have. OTP is also what you have, because verifying the phone is with you. So a phone is a modern version of a card. It's also a card, there's a SIM card inside that. So what you have is one factor. The second factor of authentication is what you know. So your Google password or your PIN number in your ATM card. is an example of what you know. So because you have a unique number or password, then that system knows that it's probably you because only you have been given this, some cover comes in your house and all that. The third one, which is a new one, is who you are, which is biometric. So the biometric as an authentication is a recent phenomenon. And we are the only country which has an online biometric authentication using fingerprint or iris. So the general rule is use two factors, because it's far more difficult to fake two factors than one factor. Is there a possibility of fraud in two factor? Possibly, because somebody will figure it out. But two-factor authentication in the old world, which was card plus PIN, in the new world will be phone plus Aadhaar. And that combination should reduce fraud quite a bit. Because if you're going to have billions of online transactions, you need very solid two-factor authentication to make sure that it works.
I think we have time for just one more question.
Aditya.
Nandan, you talked about this huge data explosion.
Yeah.
And it's the companies who are really manipulating it or owning it, and against my wishes very often.
No. When you open your Facebook account, you sign up.
I agree.
Then you say, I agree to some random stuff, you don't read it. Then what do you mean without your information?
No, so they're huge data brokers. But now tomorrow, if I say that data is the new currency and I want to create, let's say, a data bank, in which instead of putting their cash with me, they put their data with me.
Yeah.
And I become the bank.
Yeah.
Now, is it possible for me to build it on top of this?
Absolutely. You want to be an entrepreneur, you can create a digital locker company. And you can offer that as a service. And you can offer different, for example, I could offer a data bank of credit information. So when I go to get a loan, I tell you're my credit provider. I say give all my data which are relevant to credit to this. So I'll relegate to give me a loan. That's one example. Or I could create a data bank of health records. But I could, for example, create a data bank of my mobility. Like when I move my house, I would inform my insurance guy, this guy, change of address. I can have a data bank that says, pal, these are all my policies, this thing, and I'll inform you of my change of house, you handle the rest. So lots of business opportunities will come.
There's already something in the insurance space for this. The EIA is helping the people who have policies to make electronic insurance accounting.
Yeah.
But that's still not picked up because it's not statutorily mandated as yet. However, it's something similar.
Yeah. No, I think there is some dematerialization happening in policies, but I don't know the pace, frankly. But one is you have to demat the policies, but you also need an architecture and a protocol for interchange. For example, you want insurance portability, right? So I've paid 3 premiums to X, now I want to go to Y. Then I need to move the policy. Right? So there's a lot more infrastructure required to make it work as an ecosystem.
Okay, so can I ask you last?
Now you said about 1 billion people have got Aadhaar cards.
Other numbers, yeah. But card is just a manifestation.
Other numbers. So I still, when I just look around my house, there are many people who still don't have Aadhaar cards. And they seem to have some problem other to say that they're not able to get it. So
how many people in this room have Aadhaar?
I could get it easily.
Yeah, so hardly 3-4 people are missing.
So when to get everyone to get Aadhaar card?
Yeah, up to them.
Can everyone get Aadhaar card? Every person in India?
In theory, yes, because they have to go to the enrollment center and get it. Yeah.
No need for any, because again, somebody may not have birth certificate, let's say.
No, it's designed for people without birth certificate. There'll be some stragglers, they'll also get. We'll get them. There'll be some reason for them to do it sooner or later.
Well, I'm waiting for the day when I can actually send data across and get a Schengen visa. I just had to make color photocopies of all my passports, which amounted to several pages just to apply for a visa. Cost-wise, just the copying of that cost 1,800 rupees. And of course, a big stack of paper. So, Nandan, thank you so much. It was fascinating. Our kind of motto over here is to go away informed, and inspired. I think you've done a fascinating, fabulous job on both fronts. Thank you so much.
Great. Happy. They don't need anything else. Boss. That reduced possessions in my life.
That's okay. It is a little something. Just remember CC work.
Ah.
I know you'll remember every one of us here.
Thank you.
Thank you once again.
Thanks. Thanks. I'll take your leave. Thank you, guys. All the best.